My good friend Armand Martin from Zurich, Switzerland, is putting the finishing touches to a groundbreaking, an amazing intellectual adventure of a book titled The Quantum Divine Nexus, a journey to unify science and spirituality to unveil life's purpose. It is a fascinating tome, and I won't provide you with spoilers, but suffice it to say that it provides indeed a nexus between spirituality and science in a way that, to the best of my knowledge, has never been done before. And it explores religion, or shall I say religions, again in a kind of a scientific way, with emphasis, by the way, on Islam. So, I've said enough. I've said too much, maybe. The book will be out soon, and you'll be able to find out for yourselves. We have been corresponding and discussing the book throughout the past few weeks, and several interesting issues have arisen. One of them is the nature of consciousness, and the other is God as a universal observer. And all this has to do with the Chronon field theory, originally proposed by me in 1982 in my PhD dissertation, and later developed unrecognizably by Eitan Sachard, who also endowed it with a geometric language. So the Chronon field theory. And these are the topics of today's video. I would like to actually read to you portions of the correspondence between me and Armand, and I would like to start with the issue of consciousness. Now, in the Chronon field theory, there is the presumption that of the existence of a universal observer. I will go into it in the second part of this video. Let us just say that there is a universal observer, and that the act of observation, the act of measurement of this universal observer brings reality, brings the world into existence. That's, of course, the metaphysics of the physics of Chronon field theory. And then the question arises, is this universal observer a type of consciousness? Or is it a type of, shall we say, automatic device, like in a laboratory? And I will dwell and I will deal with these questions in the second half of this video. At this stage, what I want to discuss is consciousness. Anything created by a conscious observer, in my view, must be conscious. In other words, anything, any object, any organism, any constellation of matter that is put together by a cognizant, sentient, conscious observer, whose act of observation and measurement bring these entities into being, must possess consciousness. In other words, it is my belief that consciousness is an extensive property, an extensive parameter of the world as we know it. It is not limited to intelligent beings, such as human beings or artificial intelligence in the future. The linkage between consciousness and intelligence is precarious and, in my view, not well established. And so I think consciousness, exactly like intelligence, is something that characterizes every arrangement of molecules in the universe that displays order and structure and has been brought into being via the act of observation in measurement, adhering to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. And why do I believe this? Because the Creator's mind, if you wish, in all its dimensions and traits and characteristics, this mind is invariably embedded in and reflected in the creation. The Creator is in the creation. It's easy to prove this because we can reverse engineer any creation to reveal the mind of the Creator. Even inanimate objects are conscious in the sense that they contain information about the Creator's mind. Of course, this immediately raises the conundrum of active consciousness versus passive consciousness. The conscious mind of the creator is ubiquitous, is all pervasive, it's everywhere in his or her creations. That much is true and cannot be denied. But this is a kind of passive consciousness. That's one of the arguments, and I think it's wrong. I think it's a wrong argument. We'll come to it in a minute. Suffice it to say at this stage that there is no debate that the mind of the creator is utterly captured in his or her creations. And so meaning is the interaction between anything and an observer. Remember these two postulates. The creation reflects the creator's mind, captures it somehow, encapsulates it. The second theorem, or the second postulate, meaning is the interaction between anything and the observer that brings it into being. Okay, so what is the meaning of your, I don't know, watch or your smartphone? Your observations of these objects give them their only meaning. It is only when you observe the watch that the watch acquires meaning. It is only when you interact with your smartphone that the smartphone acquires meaning. Meaning, therefore, is the intersubjective space, if you wish, or in the space between subject and object, in the case of inanimate objects. It is in the space. It is not an intrinsic, innate quality of the observer or the observed, the creator or the creation. It is in the interaction between them that meaning arises. Of course, the creator embeds the potential for meaning in these objects. There is a potential there for the rise of meaning, for the emergence of meaning following an interaction. And you're beginning to see the philosophical foundations of Chronon field theory, where the field is a field of potentials, and then it eventuates via observation. Someone observes the field, and the potentials become events. Atomic particles are events. So it's not a perturbation in the field, it's a translation or a conversion of the field from potential to event. And this conversion is the outcome of interaction between the observer and the observed. Although, as we will discuss in a minute, the observer is immanent. It is the observed in Chronon field theory. But I'm going easy on you. Start with basics. And so similarly, the meaning of human life is granted by the creator of human life and only by him. And mind you, I'm an agnostic. I believe that hard atheism is a form of faith. It's another religion. So I'm not an atheist, and I'm definitely not a religious person. I have a very dim view of religions and entities such as God and angels and all this, what I consider to be rank nonsense. But there is no denying the ingrained structural relationship between meaning, observer, and observed. So there's a human life, and someone must have observed this human life into being. And I'm not talking about the process of conception or embryology. I'm talking about the very possibility of conceiving, the very emergence of matter. The permutations of matter, the complexities of matter are immaterial. What is the critical question is, how did matter arise? How does something come into being from ostensible nothingness? And so there the observer is critical. It is the observer's gaze, it is the act of observation, it is the act of measurement that gives rise to everything, human life included. So that's why I say that the meaning of human life is granted by the creator of everything, and human life included, and only by him or it or whatever you want to call it. In the Chronon field theory, the creator is the field, but we'll discuss it in a minute. And so consciousness is the awareness of this meaning. When we are aware of this meaning, we are conscious. Back to inanimate objects. How can a smartphone be conscious, therefore? Surely it is not aware. Let's retrace a bit. I'm saying that interactions between observers and observed give rise to meaning, and that awareness of this meaning is what we call consciousness. But smartphones are incapable of awareness. So even if they are endowed with meaning, they will never be conscious. Well, that's not true. Smartphones are fully aware. Any object, anything, animate or inanimate, is fully aware. Let me explain what I mean. That sounds really wacky. Let me explain what I mean. The smartphone's awareness to the observations of its creator, which is us, this awareness is programmed into the smartphone. You could imagine the smartphone as a metaphor. Okay? We are the creators. The smartphone is a creation. And we endow the smartphone with awareness. But this awareness is triggered, comes to the surface, only when we observe the smartphone. We, the creators of the smartphone, must observe the smartphone in order for any meaning to emerge. The minute you observe the smartphone is programmed to become aware of your gaze and respond to you, its creator. You're beginning to see the similes and the metaphors. So the smartphone is programmed to spot the observer's observation or measurement. And the minute this happens, the smartphone collapses into being, becomes aware of the creator, or more precisely, the creator's observation or the observer's observation, and then becomes imbued with meaning. Many types of meaning, actually. And so the smartphone becomes meaningful as a consequence of the observation or the measurement effected by the creator of the smartphone, we. Similarly, we, human beings, are programmed to respond to the gaze of our creator, to his observations of us. The same way a smartphone reacts to its creator, we react to our creator. When we are observed by this creator, we come into being, we wake up, so to speak, and we are fulfilled with meaning. We become aware of this meaning, and this is what we call consciousness. The creator's gaze, the creator's observations of us, endow us with meaning. And consciousness is how we experience this meaning. It's the internal experience of this meaning. Consciousness is, in other words, how we experience the gaze of our creator, how we experience being observed by this creator. When the creator observes us, it is then that we come into being. It is then that we acquire meaning. It is then that we experience this meaning. And it is this experience that is called consciousness. And what are we conscious of? We are conscious of the creator's gaze. We are conscious of the observation that has brought us into being, that has made us become, that has rendered us entities. And we become through the observation of the creator, not only physically, but also psychologically. Consciousness is how we experience the process of becoming via the Creator's observation of us, via the Creator's gaze. We internalize this observer. Another way to look at consciousness is to say that it is the awareness of this internal observer, which links beautifully with psychology, where we are beginning to realize that there is always some kind of internal observer inside. And so this is what I had to say about consciousness. I want to disclaim once more, just about the only topic I'm irrational about is faith. I'm irrational about faith. Of course, I have faith in the scientific method. I have faith in logic and reasoning. To some extent, I have faith in math or arithmetic. So when I say that I'm rejecting any kind of faith, it is not true. Because it's not true, it's not rational. And when I deal with the implications of a Chronon field theory is a theory in physics. It involves extremely complex mathematics, although the philosophy of Chronon field theory is very, very simple. And it contains minimal assumptions that give rise to all of physics. Still, it's a theory in physics. It's not theology, it's not philosophy, it's not even metaphysics. And yet, whenever we come across a theory in physics, for example, quantum mechanics, we immediately ask, what does it say about the world, about reality, about the possibility of some divine intelligence? Do these theories in physics, can they inform us about something which transcends physics, about the metaphysics? And Chronon field theory is not an exception. Because you see, in Chronon field theory, Chronon field theory is, as I said, the foundation, it's physics, but it gives rise and it provides proof positive, mathematical, of the existence of a universal observer. So Chronon field theory created in me a state of deep dissonance, because you cannot avoid the implications that there is a universal observer that brings the universe, brings reality into being. I keep telling myself that this observer is the Chronon field itself. Chronon field is the field of time with a big T, not the time we measure with watches, but the abstract concept of time. So Chronon field is the time field. And I keep telling myself, this universal observer is the time field itself. There's no need for an assumption of an external observer, of God. This is non-parsimonious. It defies Occam's razor. So it must be wrong. But then there's a problem of consciousness. Coming back to the way I started this video, I opened this video. There's a problem of consciousness. Is this observer, universal observer, conscious or unconscious or not conscious? And this time from the philosophical point of view, from the metaphysical point of view, and based of course on formalisms such as quantum mechanics, formalism of quantum mechanics, and definitely the formalism of the Chronon field theory, it seems to me that assuming the existence of a conscious, non-random observer who brings the time field into being and is actually the time field, this assumption has much more explanatory power, and therefore by definition is more aesthetic and more parsimonious than the assumption that the observer is non-conscious and random. In other words, when I make an assumption that the observer, this universal observer, is conscious and non-random, I get faster, better, more comprehensive outcomes, results, without, in fewer steps, and without involving any additional conceptual entities, which is the hallmark of good science. I regard science and spirituality as two languages, but there's no denying that they both refer and discuss the very same things. If these two are two languages, spirituality and science, then in principle we could construct a bilingual dictionary which would allow us to translate from one language to the other. The Chronon field theory, as I had conceived it originally in 1982, was about seeing reality through the eyes and through the mind of a universal observer. This universal observer brings everything into being, eventuates everything via his infinite observations. So this act of infinite observation brings everything into being. When I started my work in 1982, I asked myself, all theories of physics hitherto are man-made. They're about how we perceive and see reality. But if God were the one to write the manual for his creation, I mean, assuming there's a God, yeah, to write the manual for his creation, if God were the physicist, the ultimate physicist, how would the theory look? And I came up with Chronon field theory. It is a theory of everything, of course. In the Chronon field theory, there's a duality of potential and event. The field itself is a field of potentials, and it eventuates, but it eventuates through the act of observation and measurement of a universal observer. This duality of potential event is very reminiscent of the wave-particle duality, and indeed, the wave-particle duality is one private case of the potential event duality. And again, the only debate is whether this universal privileged observer, let's call it the universe, must be conscious or not. My view is that, yes, this universal observer must be conscious. But I think the problem is semantic. When I say conscious in this sense, it's not the kind of consciousness in the human or even non-human sense. Consciousness, when I use the word consciousness in the metaphysics of Chronon field theory, it is the simultaneous awareness of all the potentials and all the events, all the collapses of the superpositions. It is the time field actualizing itself, transitioning from potentials to events all at once. It is a superposition of all the potentials and all the events. This is what I call consciousness. And so the conscious observer, this privileged universal observer or measurer, it's required in order to collapse this universal wave function into what we call reality as we know it. Only a conscious observer can measure the field itself. Only a conscious observer can observe the field itself. Because the observer in Chronon field theory, this universal observer, is the field. So the field is self-aware. For the field itself to observe itself, it must have consciousness. It must be self-aware. The act of observation, the act of measurement is innate. It's immanent. It is the field that is observing itself. It is the field that is measuring itself. But these actions are intimately associated with awareness, with consciousness. While it is arguable whether an unconscious lab device in a laboratory, can collapse specific superpositions via acts of measurement, it is easy to prove, even mathematically, that no infinite amount of unconscious lab devices could collapse all the wave functions in a total field. Let me repeat this. A single lab instrument maybe can collapse a specific superposition into being and collapse the wave function so that we can effect a measurement. Even that is highly debatable, because who would interpret this data later on? A conscious being. But leave it aside from it. Let's assume that a single lab instrument is capable of effecting observation and measurement and bringing into existence, for example, an elementary particle. This device, of course, is non-conscious. There's no awareness. But it is easy to prove, mathematically, by the way, philosophically, that if you take an infinite amount of non-conscious lab instruments and put them together, they would never be able to collapse all the wave functions in a total field. This emerges mathematically from the work of Kurt Gödel, the incompleteness theorems of Kurt Gödel. It will take, so this is one problem, the incompleteness theorem. The other problem is it would take much more than the time of the existence of the universe until it experiences heat death. So it simply can't happen. The devices, these lab instruments must be conscious. The observer, the universal privileged observer, must be conscious in order to eventuate or effectuate the totality of the time field. Moreover, who or what would measure, bring into collapse the lab instrument themselves? Even if we decide that we can put together an infinite number of lab instruments and they would do the job, they would collapse the universe for us. But who would collapse them? Ultimately, even though they are macroscopic objects, still they are the outcomes of multiple collapses. Who or what would measure these lab instruments? Who or what would observe these lab instruments? Who or what would collapse, would engender a sufficient number of collapses to yield these lab instruments? In the case when there's no observer external to the field, and there's no infinite regression of observers, each observer observing the other observer, yeah, it's difficult to argue that the observation, the act of observation or measurement, is non-conscious. And so the collapse of the field, collapse of the time field, collapse of a Chronon field, must be imminent. It must be an inside job, if you wish. There must be an identity between the field and the observer. They're one and the same. The universal privileged observer's consciousness is the field coming into self-awareness, so to speak, via the act of eventuation. The transition from potentials to events, to actualized events, is actually an act of awakening, an act of awareness. But of course, there's no beginning and end to this. It's not like the observer has been unconscious or unaware or asleep or something and then woke up and eventuated the field and became aware or self-aware. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that awareness and consciousness are intricately integrated with the very fabric of the time field. There would have been no time field without self-awareness of the field, without consciousness. The time field is in a constant state of disequilibrium. Potentials keep becoming events. Order and structure keep emerging and increasing in pockets of the time field, all the time, so to speak, and overall. And this implies the existence of a conscious universal observer, which keeps creating events via its acts of observation. In Chronon field theory, the observer is immanent. It is one and the same with the observed, with the time field. But this doesn't vitiate the fact that the field is observing itself. Field is measuring itself and therefore must be self-aware and therefore must be conscious. There is therefore no design involved in the Chronon field theory. It's not a religious theory. There's no creationism there. There's no designer. There's no watchmaker. There's no design involved. But there is constant non-random creation via a preference for collapse-inducing observations and measurements. It's kind of inbuilt asymmetry. Collapse-inducing creative acts of observation and measurement are preferred. It's a little like matter and antimatter, where matter is preferred. This preference is non-random. In other words, it must involve some kind of force, some kind of will, if you wish. Science, of course, is non-teleological. We don't allow teleology. Science never incorporates concepts such as design, intent or intention, direction, will, planning. There's no place for any of this in science. This is metaphysics or philosophy. But science also follows the evidence where it leads and makes use of tools of syllogism and logic that cannot be just cast aside when the outcome is uncomfortable. Had the universal observer been unconscious, there could have never been order and structure to the universe. Random fluctuations, perturbations, from potentials to events and back, would have created a state of permanent equilibrium indistinguishable from entropy. So the very fact that this is not the case is a very powerful proof of the existence of some kind of non-random process, asymmetrical process, a process with preferential process. And these usually are associated with a mind, with some kind of mind. Artificial or not, doesn't matter. Animate or not, doesn't matter. But these are associated with a mind, awareness, and consciousness, even in inanimate objects, as I've demonstrated. This is a very strong argument from physics, statistical thermodynamics, and statistical dynamics, for the existence of a conscious, privileged, universal, non-random observer. In Chronon field theory, the field is its own observer. We don't have an external observer. And this is the physics. But this observer must be, as I said, random and non-random, and conscious. And this is the metaphysics. If you insist on translating this into a religious language, which is just, as I said, the flip coin of science, it's just another language. It uses different methodology. Faith is not reason, of course. But it's still an attempt to explicate reality. It's a hermeneutic attempt. So, if you wish to translate everything I said to a religious language, let's say, God is the time field. All of us are events. We are realized, eventuated potentials in the time field, within God. And where is all this happening? Within God. Within God's mind, if you wish. These are all metaphors, of course. God, if there is a God, doesn't have a mind, but it's happening immanently, within, not from without. And this is a very compelling religious view. God is not external to creation. God is creation. God is the field. We are all realized potentials in God's mind, the Chronon field, the time field. The field, God, is not coming from anywhere and not going anywhere. The time field has no beginning, has no end. Of course, the time field by definition is timeless. The time field has not been created. It is the only source of creation. Only within the time field can and do potentials become events. There's no eventuation outside the time field. So there's no external observer. There's no beginning and end. There's no before and after. Only within God, in a religious language, can and do we become. And what is free will in this sense? Free will is the residue, the relic or the remnant of our primordial state as potentials in a universe-wide superposition. Everything and everyone, we are objects after all. Everything and everyone used to be a potential and then became an event, eventuated, actualized, realized. But initially we were all potentials. And in this state of potential, as a potential, you have an infinite will. Because you are interlaced, you're integrated with the totality of the field. You are part of God, if you want to use a religious language. And so in this universe-wide or reality-wide or field-wide or God-wide superposition, everything is possible. Everything is possible. And because everything is possible, you have free will. Free will is simply the space of all potentials. Free will survives this potential state and characterizes us when we're eventuated. We used to be potentials in a universe-wide superposition. Our free will was infinite. Then we collapsed into an event within God, the universal conscious observer, whose observation and measurement brought us into being, but we retained the free will from our previous state as potentials. This is, by the way, a view of quite a few religions. Kabbalah says that we have an obligation towards God, because God cannot be healed, cannot be rendered complete without us. This makes sense only if we are within God, and God is not an outsider, an external entity, or a mere watchman, or a mere observer. The dream metaphor, that we are God's dream, is beautiful and poetic, but I don't think it's correct. Dreams are often disjointed, non-linear, even impossible, so realistic. And it doesn't sit well with quantum mechanics and with the Chronon field theory. I don't think it's a dream state. I think the universal observer has to be aware. Aware. It is not awareness in the human sense, like observing myself. The universal observer does not observe itself, so it's not this kind of awareness. But the universal observer's existence or being is so total that there is no place for it to not be aware. And so the universal observer has to be aware in order to choose to make a measurement. After all, measurements and observations are volitional acts. Even when you are a universal, privileged, total observer, or even when you are the field, there must be some stage preceding the measurement or the observation, that stage that leads to the observation and measurement. We call it will. And so the universal observer has to be aware in order to choose to make a measurement, to collapse the wave function or the superposition, or in Chronon field theory, to eventuate a potential. In all monotheistic religions, God creates knowingly, intentionally, and has a master plan. Logos, that is how the New Testament starts. Speech is the first divine act of Genesis. A much more aesthetic, parsimonious, and compelling view is that God is the field within which we all become via his divine observation of us and himself. In himself immanently, not as an external observer, but as an inescapable total presence. God observes us into becoming. God realizes our potentials. God makes us be via Him. And so I'm using religious language, of course, not because I'm a religious person. I'm vehemently not a religious person. I'm just trying to translate it for religious people. In Judaism, there's the concept of hashgacha. In the Ashariya school in Islam, God is conscious and predetermines the world. He is the only one endowed with the ability to create anything at all. And the Chronon field theory is not moving anywhere. It's not flowing. It's not Newtonian. The time of the Chronon field is there. It was Newton's view that time is a river which flows. That's not Chronon field theory. The time field is just there, an infinite field of potentials which eventuate, become events when observed by a universal observer. So a much better metaphor in this sense is an ocean. Time is immanent. It permeates reality. It's ubiquitous. It's all pervasive. But time is the only reality. Time is reality waiting to happen, a potential, once it is observed and becomes an event. And who is the observer? This universal, privileged process that makes everything eventuate? It's the field itself. But because the field has no time, no beginning, no end, it is highly resonant and reminiscent with the concept of God in monotheistic religions, at least. And that's where Armand Martin's book uses insights from physics and biology and many other disciplines to try to bridge this ostensible, fallacious gap between how science sees the world and how religion or spirituality see the world. I think, as I said, these are two languages. We are simply using different names, essentially for the very same things. I'm looking forward to Armand's book because it's very well argued and relies on cutting-edge research. I think it should provoke, at the very least, a conversation. Good morning, everyone. What time is it? It's time to study the Chronon field theory. My name is Sam Vaknin, and I'm a father of the theory. I proposed the theory in my PhD dissertation in 1984. The PhD thesis, is available via the Library of Congress and United Microfiche International, UMI, which I believe has been absorbed by ProQuest, but I'm not quite sure. The Chronon field theory went through two phases. Stage one, my PhD, and then 30 years with no responses and no reactions, and it just went dormant. And then, about 10 years ago, Eitan Sached discovered my work and recast it in geometric terms. My original thesis was algebraic. And he, of course, developed it beyond recognition, and the Chronon field theory is as much his as mine, and possibly more his than mine. Today, I would like to give you an overview of both my work and Sached's work. Now, physicists would benefit from this video the most. Laymen would find it a lot more difficult, but it does contain philosophical nuggets. The philosophy of Chronon field theory is very unusual. I don't want to tout my horn, but I'm getting used to it, so I would say it's groundbreaking. Okay, without further ado, to my coffee. and to the Chronon field theory. In my work, chronons are time quarks. They're time elementary particles. Now, there's nothing new about this. This has been proposed 200, 250 years ago, and numerous physicists have worked along these lines. Some of them regarded chronons as durations. Some of them regarded chronons as real particles. In my work, chronons are real particles. They are quarks. The interactions of chronons yields what we know as time. Not time with a t, small t, which is the time measured by clocks, but time with a capital T, the concept of time, the dimension, if you wish. It is yielded by chronons interacting. Because there are various types of chronons in my work. They are like quarks, up, down, etc., etc. The interactions between the various types also gives rise to the time arrow. There is a cancellation of kind going on, and what's left is the time asymmetry. Hence, the title of my work, Time Asymmetry Revisited. What about space-time? Space-time exists where the Chronon wave function collapses. The space-time is an outcome of a collapse of a wave function. And the whole theory rests on a duality. The basic duality in quantum mechanics is the wave-particle duality. The basic duality in Chronon field theory is the potential-event duality. Potentials and actual events or actualized events are facets of the same underlying unity, if not entity. This duality is crucial to the development of the theory. Now, because events and potentials are one and the same in the Chronon field theory, there's no particles. Particles are replaced by strings of collapse events. Particles actually are events in Chronon field theory. That's why it's a time-oriented theory. Its basic building blocks are events and potentials for events rather than particles. The quantum mechanics of the theory is a quantum mechanics of events as well, not of particles. This is the introductory part. We'll go deeper in a bit. Now, the Chronon field is a field of events or perturbations, if you wish. It's a perturbative theory. It's a theory of perturbations. Time with a small t is time measured by clocks, is the outcome of interactions in the time field, in the field of time with a capital T. And so chronons are both potentials and actualized events. There is an open question: what causes the actualization? Do chronons self-actualize? Are they observer dependent? In other words, is there a kind of Copenhagen interpretation of Chronon field theory? Is there a need for an observer to collapse the wave function? Or is a collapse spontaneous, internally determined somehow? Be that as it may, the theory does not require gauge fields, as physicists among you surely have understood by now. And although gauge fields are not required, they emerge naturally in higher accelerations. Now, time-space, as I said, is the outcome of the collapse of a wave function. I don't know, no one can answer whether there's a mediation of an observer, whether an observer collapses the wave function. But of course, you can immediately see the religious implications. Because if the entire universe, if space-time is a collapse of a wave function, and if the collapse is dependent upon an observer, that observer, universal observer, might as well be called God. It is ironic that an agnostic like me has led to God in his work. But as I said, there are no assurances that the whole process is observer mediated. What is postulated in my thesis is that all chronons have been entangled at the moment of the Big Bang. There is a kind of universal, universe-wide entanglement of all chronons. In other words, all potentials and all actualized events are entangled ab initio, from the very beginning. And this has enormous implications, because it implies that the entire universe is essentially a quantum machine or a quantum device. And if it is, then our understanding of it currently is deeply flawed. The theory gives rise to the equivalence of quantum field theories and so on and so forth. So the quantum field theory of Chronon field theory is relativistic, actually, and in this sense, it's deterministic. The chronons are the field quanta, the quanta of the field. They are the excited states of the field. And the integration of everything is via quantum superpositions. It's quite a mouthful, but physicists among you would surely understand. I indicated that Chronon field theory is perturbative. There's perturbations. So there is a perturbative quantum field theory. Time from the Big Bang is mediated by chronons. There is an expansion, including an expansion of the metric. You could even conceive of the whole thing as a phonon of the metric. Time as a phonon of the metric. And there are many ways to look at time through the Chronon field theory. There are no bound states in any case. The excitations that I've mentioned, the states of the chronons, they are stochastic perturbances. They are kinds of vibrations, if you wish. And in this sense, there's an affinity between superstring theories and Chronon field theory, but as distinct from superstring theories, in Chronon field theory, there's no need for extra dimensions, which renders Chronon field theory a lot more grounded and a lot more easily falsifiable. It yields falsifiable predictions. While many superstring theories are lacking when it comes to yielding falsifiable predictions. Now, the cumulative perturbances that I mentioned create a distortion of space-time, and this is what we know as curvature. These are the basics, the philosophical basics of the theory, and they've all been proposed in my PhD thesis in 1984. And then, as I said, there was a hiatus of about 30 years. And then Eitan Sachet, who is nothing short of a genius in my view, came on the scene. And his contributions have transformed Chronon field theory. First of all, he afforded it a distinct geometric or visualization dynamic, which was missing. It was totally abstract and algebraic, therefore very limited. And the second thing he did, he added numerous insights and literally transformed it beyond recognition, I would say. It's perhaps much more his work than mine. Sachet suggested that there is a universal scalar field of time, but time is not a universal coordinate. He says that particles interacting within non-gravitational fields are seen as clocks whose trajectory is not Minkowski geodesic. So in my work, chronons are ideal clocks, and they mediate time. They are the relationship between chronons and time is like a relationship between the Higgs boson and mass. That's in my work. But in Sached's work, he goes a lot deeper, and he says that a field in which a small enough clock is not geodesic can be described by a scalar field of time with non-zero curvature gradient. Scalar field is either real, acceleration of charged matter, neutral clocks, or imaginary, acceleration of Majorana type matter clocks. Be that as it may, it preserves the scalar nature of the scalar nature of time. The scalar field adds information to space-time. This information is not anticipated by the metric tensor alone. And the time in this case cannot be realized as a coordinate because it cannot be measured from a reference submanifold along different curves. There's a lot of math in this. There's manifolds and Lie algebras and so on and so forth. Those of you who would like to review the math, there's a link in the description. Click on it and you will be exposed to my math and Eitan Sached's math in various papers published in various academic journals and so on and so forth. You're invited to download them, review the math, and please alert us to any errors, any mistakes in thinking, any mistakes in calculations, and so on and so forth. We are looking forward to input. We are hungry for input, actually. So the non-geodesic alignment is attributed to electromagnetism, or electromagnetic phenomena. Both the mass and the electric charge, in this case, generate gravity. I'll come to it in a minute. It's a very controversial aspect of Eitan Sached's work. Charge, unlike inertial mass, is coupled to a non-geodesic vector field. But they both yield gravity. Again, I will come to it in a minute. So only the entire energy momentum tensor has vanishing divergence, misalignment of physically accessible events in an observer's spacetime, plus gravity as a controlling response by volumetric contraction of the observer's spacetime in the direction where events bend or are accelerated. Put together, this gives the main pillar of Sached's work. Sached's work yields literally all of known physics. From these basic assumptions, mine and later his, in the entire field of physics can be derived and is derived. Anything from particle mass ratios, fine structure constant, the physical meaning of 3D foliations, Bekenstein-Hawking entropy to area constant, acceleration field strength, quantum mechanics, everything emerges naturally out of the theory, which is an excellent indication, I think. It's an indication that the theory is onto something and touches upon some foundational, basic facet of existence, of reality. Okay, in Sached's work, in Big Bang manifold, the field is the upper limit on measurable time by interacting clocks. Yes, and he goes from each event to the singularity as a limit, and that yields fascinating outcomes. I again encourage you to go to the link in the description to download the papers and read them. They are not only mathematically sophisticated, but they are, I think in all these papers, there's a lot of philosophical, how how to put it without sounding too grandiose, philosophical alternatives, shall we say, which are thought-provoking in my view. And I'm not only referring to my work, I'm actually referring mostly to Sartre's work. In the de Sitter, anti-de Sitter spacetime, the reference submanifolds from which time is measured along integral curves, they constitute all the events in which the scalar field is zero. Matter in the Einstein-Grossman equation is replaced by action of acceleration field, the action of the acceleration field. So it's geometric action, not foreseen by the metric alone. As I said, this is Eitan's major contribution, the geometrization of the whole thing. It's a theory of causal sets, in effect. Space-time exists where the Chronon wave function collapses. Particles are replaced by strings of collapse events, and there's a quantum theory of events, not of particles. Again, reverting to my original work in 1984. I mentioned that there is a part of Eitan's work which is controversial, even in my eyes, and which is not mentioned in my original work, nor does it emerge from it. But Eitan's geometric development of the work, plus input from many other scientists and physicists around the world, led Eitan to the following. This new formation of matter in Eitan's work replaces the stress-energy momentum tensor. Positive charge manifests attracting gravity and stronger repelling acceleration field, which repels even uncharged particles that measure proper time. In other words, particles that have a rest mass. Negative charge manifests repelling anti-gravity and stronger acceleration field that attracts even uncharged particles. Now this of course accounts for dark matter, dark energy and all, but it also yields a startling prediction about electrogravity, about the interchange between gravity and electric charge. There's even a patent granted to Eitan, such as based on this discovery. It's very controversial, and the interchange between electric charge and gravity is not entirely clear in my view. There's a lot more work to be done, but it's more robust and rigorous than one would have assumed. In other words, it breaks through the prejudices of previous mathematical theories and forces me, for example, as a physicist, to contemplate it, to think whether it's true. If it is true, it's one of the greatest technological breakthroughs ever. It means that we could convert gravity to electricity and vice versa. We could develop anti-gravity and so on and so forth. I will not go into all this. Begins to sound a lot like science fiction. Chronon field theory is a major theoretical reconception of physics as a way to understand reality. It dispenses with secondary properties. Everything emerges from essentially a single basic underlying assumption. Potentials are events. Everything is events. There are no particles, they're only events. Quantum theory of events. Space-time is a collapse of a wave function, probability, in other words, potentials. And space-time as an event is also a potential because it remains in a superposition state until an eventual collapse. Collapse is mediated via an observer or is spontaneous and self-generating. That's besides the point, and it's a lot more, I would say, philosophical than It's a lot more philosophy than physics, but everything is about possibilities, probabilities, even events which in classical quantum mechanics and so on and so forth are distinguished from probabilities. Even particles which in classical quantum mechanics and so on and so forth are distinguished from probabilities. In Chronon field theory, they are probabilities. Our existence, therefore, is a potential. Now the potential manifests, becomes an actualized event, but the distinction is spurious and unnecessary in the Chronon field theory. This single basic assumption gives rise to all of physics as we know it. While in other theories in physics, there are multiple suppositions and assumptions and entities, a multiplication of entities. Even in the simplest theories, for example, special relativity, or there's still half a dozen, if not a dozen, entities. It's a strong indicator that something is wrong with these theories. There's no parsimony. Occam's razor. A theory of everything would be based on a single principle and perhaps a single entity, for sure. Simplicity, aesthetics, beauty, symmetry are built into reality. And the Chronon field theory, to the best of my knowledge, is the closest we've ever gotten to this, because it has a single assumption, not even an entity, just a single assumption. And yet it yields all known physics and provides falsifiable predictions. I hope it gets taken by the physics community, analyzed, possibly debunked and falsified. That's the way of science, but it deserves attention. I'm saying this not on behalf of myself. I'm far removed. My last contributions have to do mostly with the mathematics of the theory. But I'm saying this on behalf of science itself. I think there's a challenging idea here, and I think it should not be neglected. It should be looked into. Thank you for listening.
Sam, I'm very glad that you agreed to talk to me about chronons, because I was really not sure you had thought about this concept, when we made programs back in the 90s.
Actually, I did.
And at the very end of the last show we did on the radio in Israel, in Hebrew, from right to left, so to speak, you mentioned the chronon, which was very surprising. So let's revisit the chronon.
Yeah.
And we decided to call this talk, It's High Time to Define Time. But I would also like to catch another concept, a small concept, the concept of God, which somehow seems to be linked to the question of time. And I'll open with a quotation from Shulamit Har-Even, who was a famous Israeli writer. And I once asked her what she thought about God, and she said, well, God is the other language. So here I am.
She almost anticipated my work.
Okay.
Because my work is about language. Actually,
Okay.
the Chronon field is another language.
Let's hear about chronons then.
First of all, I hate to burst your bubble, but actually our talks were in the 80s. We are much older than that.
In the 80s, you think?
Yeah. So we're much older
but
than
late
that.
80s, maybe.
Actually, mid 80s.
Okay.
But late 80s, I think you're right. And so my work, the Chronon field theory, was first developed in my PhD, in physics in 1992, 1983. So by the time we had our chats, it was already 4 years into its existence.
Wow.
But having tried to communicate it, even to physicists, even once to Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize winner, and possibly the second brightest mind in physics after Einstein, having tried to communicate the Chronon field theory and having failed consistently, I gave up on it. I gave up on it until a group of very, very talented, I would say geniuses, Israeli geniuses actually, all of them Israeli, picked up a copy of my PhD in the Library of Congress. They didn't know what they were doing. They were searching for time and they found a copy of my PhD in the Library of Congress and they picked it up. And they fell in love with the theory. And ever since then, this group of physicists, all of them are physicists actually, by now well over 50 physicists from 7 countries, they've been developing this.
Not only Israelis.
Not only Israelis anymore.
Okay.
Not only Israelis anymore. Although the main contributor to this very day is an Israeli. His name is Eitan Sachert. So he's in Israel. He lives in the United States now. So they took the theory further, way further than, I mean, it's no longer my
You
theory.
don't mean Eitan Sushar, the one that is on El Al flights? The one who presents all kinds of mental tricks?
Oh, I don't believe so. No,
Okay. So it's somebody
He's a
else.
computer scientist and a physicist.
Okay,
No, I don't
sorry.
believe he would be presenting tricks.
Because his name is also
He didn't go that low.
Sushar.
No. He's a computer scientist and a physicist. He lives in
Okay.
the United States. And others, there's Horowitz, there's others. And they work together to develop the theory. And they took it so far that it's no longer mine. It's no longer mine. I was kind of a catalyst or the impetus for the development. Still, most of, if not all, of my original ideas are still in the evolved form of the theory.
Okay.
And so to answer your question, after this very long introduction, which I wanted to put a bit in historical context, what's going on. To answer your question, my work, what I try to do in my work is twofold. I try to introduce a new language to describe reality, in other words, to do physics. And the second thing I try to do is to deconstruct Einstein and to say that time is not a dimension, but a force. It's a force. The test was this: can we take these two underlying assumptions, and of course in this limited time frame, and I can't delve into the equations and so on, but can we take these two principles?
Which two principles?
New language with one word, time. Not mass, not momentum, no other words.
No vector.
Nothing, just time.
Time.
If we take this monosyllabic new language and we couple it with a force field,
Okay.
with the way we describe forces,
Yes.
which we call fields. If we couple these two, can we then derive all the equations in all the fields of physics that had ever existed?
You were trying to create a toe theory?
Yes, a kind of toe theory.
Toe theory,
Yes. In
a
effect, it is.
theory of everything.
Yes, but there's a test for this, and the test is, if you take your assumptions and couple them, and can you, based on these assumptions alone, derive the totality of physics? And what these scientists, these physicists, succeeded to do over the past 6 years is to derive all of physics. Now I'm comfortable to say this because they had completed the work about 2 or 3 months ago.
Oh.
And they had derived all of physics: cosmology, particle theory, chromodynamics, electrodynamics.
As large as cosmology.
Everything.
And as small as...
Let's cut it short, everything.
Everything.
Newtonian physics, Einsteinian physics, I mean, you name it, they succeeded from these two principles. So the question arises, of course, now that we know that these two principles give us the totality and the entirety of physics, what are these principles? What are we talking about?
Right.
So the first thing I wanted to do is not to repeat Einstein's mistake. Einstein's mistake was not in developing relativity theories. Relativity theories are not mistaken.
Of course.
They're very good theories. They've been proven time and again, and so on and so forth. Are we 18 minutes into the talk?
No.
18
We
minutes
have
left.
still 18 to
10
go.
minutes left. But what I consider to be his mistake is that he did not invent a new language. Essentially, Einstein's language is Newton's language. They're using the same concepts. Yes, Einstein looked at it from the left side, while Newton was looking at it from the right side. It's like the blind man and the elephant, you know?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Where
grasping the elephant.
they,
One of them is
they
holding the
each touch
tail.
a different
But it's the
part
same-
of the elephant's body.
But it's the same elephant.
It's the same elephant.
It's the same elephant. There's no, Einstein and Newton are working on the same elephant. And I wanted a new elephant. I wanted to introduce a new elephant into the room.
Like Shulamit Harevin's new language.
Yes,
Exactly.
that's what I'm saying.
Yes, okay.
It's very apt,
Okay.
actually. It's very apt what you said, because I introduced a totally new language. And I said, I am not going to use the old language. I refuse to speak Hebrew. I'm going to speak English, you know. So I'm not going to introduce, and the new language consisted of one word, time. That's all.
That's the whole, it's
new
a language with one word.
I said to myself, I must derive all the equations of physics using one word and one assumption. Now, this is what is known as Occam's razor, parsimony. If there is a multiplication of words and a multiplication of entities, probably your theory is wrong. That's Occam's razor. And what had happened in physics over the decades, especially the last 100 years, is an explosion, a supernova of entities, new entities, and supernova of new words and new concepts, which is a very bad sign. It's a sign that we have lost our way.
Give me examples of...
I don't know, there's well over 100 and something elementary particles. There are models for particles, and models for gravity. And
No,
models
but that's about particles, not about time.
No.
Nobody thought of bringing in particles into the theory of time, was there?
Everyone realizes that physics is in crisis because it has too many concepts, too many entities, too many laws and rules. So everyone is trying to unify.
Okay, that I
Create a
that
theory
I know. Okay.
to reduce it. Einstein said we should have one equation.
Okay.
That's one equation, the God equation. Should have one equation.
One equation.
And I said, rather than going from multiplicity to unity, I'm going to start with unity. Why do I have to go from multiplicity? I'm going to start with unity. I'm going to start with, and I said, what should I use? Should I use maybe momentum? Should I use force? Should I use, I don't know, mass maybe? Should I use energy? Should I use space? What would capture all of these? And so the only thing that captures all of this is time. Because in time, given time, all these things happen. If I give you, for example, had I decided on energy, energy doesn't give you time. Energy doesn't give you many elements in physics.
Energy gives you mass.
Energy is a form of mass.
It's a form of mass. Mass gives you energy.
Energy gives you momentum and force.
Okay.
But it doesn't give you many other things.
Okay.
Okay, so if I take space, space gives me gravity, curvature of space, gives me, I don't know, mass to some extent, but nothing else. So each of these concepts can give you some other concepts, can lead to some other concepts, but not to others.
Okay.
There's only one concept that leads to everything. Time.
Okay.
Given enough time, you have mass, and you have space, and you have force, and you have momentum, and you have everything else. Given enough time. Everything happens in time, in due time. Okay. So I said, okay, so let me rewrite physics using time. But then I said, if I use time as a field of potentials, because it's a field of potentials where everything can happen, mass can happen, force can happen, momentum can happen. So it's a field.
It's a field
of potentials.
Of potential.
Potentialities.
Yes.
But we know in physics that whenever we have a field, we have a force. There's no such thing in physics as field without force. You have electromagnetic field. So whenever you have a field, you have a force. So I said this should not be an exception. If time is a field of potentials, then it's a force. Because we don't have an exception.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a force.
So time is a force.
Time is a force, not a dimension. And then I went further. I said, wait a minute, if time is a force, we know that all forces are mediated via particles.
And or waves?
Particles are described potentially as waves.
Okay.
But forces are mediated through particles.
Particles.
Even mass is mediated through a particle known as Higgs boson. So particles mediate the physical world. They are like couriers. They are like Federal Express. They have the small vans and they carry energy.
Yes.
They carry mass. They carry,
Right.
they're like couriers. So I said time should not be an exception. If time is a field and time is a force, there should be a particle of time to mediate time. And then I came to chronons. And chronons are these particles. But then I went a step further. I don't know if you're following me.
I'm following you. So
trying to
far I
make it-
know
I'm trying to make it
that
as-
we've reached the
I'm trying to make it as simple as
the
possible.
particle called Chronon,
Yes.
and now I'm trying to understand what it does.
But I'm showing you the heritage, the chain of
Of
thought,
thought.
the train of thought. So, and then I said, okay, there's this particle, but time is a field of potentialities, so there must be a way for time to become mass. There must be a way for time to become momentum. There must be a way for time to become force, energy. There must be a way to realize these potentials in the field.
Yes.
How? So I said, well, the only solution is for the chronon to be in different states. Not in a single state, but to change states. We call this process excitation. So the chronon is excited.
Yeah.
A little like me.
Yeah,
The chronon is excited, and when it passes through various excitations, and it disrupts the field. It disrupts the field. And it creates events. Disruption of the field is an event. This event could be, if we look at it at an event this way, it's mass. If we look at it the other way, it's energy. Depends on how you look at these events, they translate into the totality of physics. So, chronons are you can think of it this way if you want, in layman's terms. Chronons shapeshift. They change shape.
Okay.
When chronons, so they disguise themselves, they wear clothes.
Okay.
If they wear a certain type of clothing, they become mass. If they wear another type of clothing, they become energy. Another type, they become force. So the excitation states disrupt the field, literally disrupt it, and create what we call reality.
Is there a specific number of excitation stages?
This is a question that is excellent. Almost I could begin to suspect that you're a physicist. Because there is a Pauli principle that says that excitation states are quantum. In other words, they're not continuous, but they're
yes.
disparate.
Okay.
So yes, the chronon excitation states are disparate. They obey the Pauli exclusion principle.
Okay, so
Disparate. But we can map each excitation state to the old language of physics. Like this excitation state is what used to be called in physics mass.
mass. Okay.
And so on. So we have a dictionary. We have like a dictionary.
Okay, so this excitation stage is mass, and this excitation stage is
energy.
Is energy.
This excitation state is force.
If I may, there's another example. I learned many years ago that actually the Indian belief is a monotheistic belief. So I said, but you have Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. And they said, well, they're only manifestations of the one Godhead.
Holy Trinity. You don't need to go so far.
You could even say that.
Holy
yes,
Trinity.
yes. It's one God, but
one God
with three
with-
manifestations. So here we have
Exactly.
one
One field of potential,
field,
which is where there is a single particle, and this single particle changes its
wears
shape
different
Guises.
guises.
and becomes what we used to call the old physics. Even Einsteinian physics becomes. So, how does it become excited? Why would it become excited? Why
And by what and by whom?
Yeah. How would it? It acquires. It accelerates. It moves. The field of potential is a field of potential because it has kind of latent energy in it. So the particle, think of it. The particle surfs the wave. Think of this field as an ocean. So the particle is surfing the waves.
Okay.
And he's accelerating. As it accelerates, it creates all these things, mass and so on. So this is in a nutshell. But here's the beauty. The beauty is that by using essentially two principles, time as a force with a field and a single particle in different excitation states, which is infinitely simpler than current physics. Like infinitely simple. I mean, current physics is an abomination. This is much simpler. If you use this, you can derive every theory ever invented in physics, including string theory, including quantum field theory, the latest, the cutting-edge theories in physics. If you use these two simple principles, you can derive them fully. You get them fully. So I give you an example to לסבר את האוזן. I said that the Chronon has excitation states. Yes. When the Chronon gets excited, like me, it vibrates. Begins to vibrate normally.
Yes.
It accelerates, and of course, creates vibrations. These vibrations are what we call strings in string theory.
Okay.
Because strings in string theory are tiny vibrations, tiny vibrations that look like strings. So they're tiny vibrations. So when the Chronon vibrates, gets excited, accelerates, never mind how you call it, it becomes a string in effect. In other words, the two theories intermesh perfectly, seamlessly. And my theory yields all the equations of string theory without any effort.
I have another question, and this will prove that I'm not a physicist. Has anybody ever seen a Chronon?
No, you don't need to see, no one has seen a quark.
Okay, nobody has seen a quark.
We don't pretend in physics, at least good physicists, don't pretend that they are talking about reality. Physics deals with one subject matter, physics. That's the subject matter of physics.
So that's a language?
It's a language that deals with language.
That deals with language.
And then there is a correspondence theory of truth. This language should somehow resonate with our observations.
Okay.
And we have processes, the scientific method, falsifiability. We have ways to test how close is the language to our observations. But we don't pretend to put our finger on a quark. A quark is a useful language element. It's a useful language, useful metaphor.
Okay.
Why it's useful? Because it yields predictions that we can then falsify via observations. End of story. Same with my theory. It's not a question whether there is a Chronon. A Chronon is a language element. And if the Chronon theory yields all the other theory in physics which are already tested, these theories are verified.
Yes.
For example, you can derive relativity theory totally from Chronon theory.
Okay.
No problem whatsoever. That was actually one of the easiest tasks. But deriving string theory and quantum field theory was much more difficult. But it's also, all the theories of physics can be derived from this, and because they are verified, Chronon field theory is verified, actually. So it's like it's like Esperanto. I would come with some language, and this language would have one word and one.
Well, Esperanto has many words.
One word and one grammatic principle. Imagine, I come with one word and one grammatic principle. So you can't express the
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, this language is useless. And then I show you that through clever manipulation, you can actually derive not only Hebrew, but all the languages of the world.
Okay.
And not only all the existing languages in the world, but every possible language.
The artificial languages.
Every possible language, including artificial, yes, including what we call formal languages. This is Chronon field theory. That's the power of Chronon field theory.
Thank you.
Physics today is fragmented. Mechanics explains the motion of the large. Relativity bends space-time around mass, and quantum physics governs the subatomic world. Each theory works on its own, but they refuse to fit together into a single, elegant truth. Worse, the quantum world grows more chaotic with each discovery as particles multiply and complexity spirals out of control. Where is the elegance, the simplicity that a true theory of everything demands? What if the solution isn't more complexity, but less? What if the universe could be explained by one field? Time. Imagine that time isn't a passive backdrop, but the primary force. The Chronon field theory posits that chronons, particles of time, are the universe's true foundation. Every force, from gravity to mass, is simply an excitation state within this infinite, all-pervasive field. It's an elegant simplicity that redefines everything we know. A universe built on time reshapes our understanding of reality. It explains the connection between quantum physics and relativity. It simplifies the complexity of modern physics. And it opens the door to questions that extend beyond science. What if time, as an all-pervasive force, is also the bridge to something greater? Across history, sacred texts have seen time as nonlinear, infinite, and profound. From Einstein's equations to spiritual traditions, the idea of time connects us all. If time is the fundamental force, what creates the time field itself? What lies beyond this all-encompassing ocean? The Chronon field theory is only the beginning. Discover its full implications. In the book, The Quantum Divine Nexus, the groundbreaking book that explores reality's deepest mysteries. Available the 6th of January 2025 as hardcover, paperback, and ebook. Pre-order now, only on Amazon.